Okay, the release mode on the camera, kind of on the top, it's a collar around the mode dial. And a number of options on here. This is what happens when you press down on the shutter release itself. Most of the time, most people are going to be fine with S for single frame. You press down, you get one picture. That's really all you need most of the time. There is a continuous low and a continuous high speed. The high speed will be at 6 frames per second. The low speed is adjustable, but it starts off at 3 frames. You can have it 4 or 5 or 2 or 1 if the continuous high speed is a little too fast. There is a quiet mode, and for those who don't own the camera and wondering how much difference is there, let me fire it under the normal mode. And I'll hold it close to the mic. So here's the continuous low setting. Actually, that's not fair because I was at a slower than normal shutter speed. Let's try a normal shutter speed. Continuous high, coming up. Okay, we're reaching the buffer on the raw here. One of the downsides when shooting raw and continuous high is that you can't shoot very many pictures to the RAM memory before it stores it into the memory card. And so the buffer, as it is known, let's try this again. And then the camera slows down. So there's a very short burst that you can shoot. But what I was going to get to was the Q mode. It technically is a little bit quieter. Some people don't find it to be a normal camera noise, and they find it more disturbing, even though it is quieter. But if you did want to make a little bit less noise in a theater, for instance, you could put it in the quiet mode. We also have a self-timer on there, which is kind of nice because you can go in and you can adjust how long the self-timer is. I believe we have the choice of 2, 5, 10, and 20 seconds. We can adjust that when we get into the menu setting. And then there is a mirror lockup mode on the camera as well. Let's see, what else do I have? A few other things here. I'm not actually worried about that. You can customize the continuous low mode on the camera by going into the custom menu D5. What I did want to address was the mirror up mode, so a little graphic to go along with this. So here is the problem when taking normal pictures at kind of slow shutter speeds. You press down on the shutter release, the mirror goes up, and as soon as the mirror hits the top of the mirror box, this vibration rattles the camera right as the shutter is opening and exposing the film. And so at some very particular shutter speeds, even though your camera is on a tripod, there's going to be a little bit of vibration and thus blurriness to your photograph. So what you want to engage is mirror lockup. And what happens with mirror lockup is it's now a 2-stage process. You press once to bring the mirror up. The vibrations happen throughout the camera, same as always, but then they dissipate. And then after a period of time, usually about 5 seconds, you press the shutter release a second time. Now obviously we have to be using a shutter release that is not connected to the camera, or at least not directly on the camera. This is where a wireless cable release or a cable release or a wireless cable release will work. And so I was down at Yosemite National Park a few months ago, and I forgot to turn mirror lockup on. And you can see in this magnified section on the left that it's not very sharp. But then when I remembered what my problem was, because this happens to a lot of people, at least I like to think it does, and I turn on mirror lockup, you'll notice that it's a much sharper image. And so it can have a huge impact. Now this shot was around 1/8 of a second. And what anyone who does this type of photography will let you know is that there is a vibration zone where you are likely to encounter these problems. If you are shooting from a tripod, this is not really an issue handheld with faster shutter speeds. It's generally around a 15th to around a second. It may extend up into the 30th of a second range. But anytime you're in this range shooting from a tripod, you should be using mirror lockup for maximum sharpness. If you don't, you're going to get slightly blurry pictures. So that is the release mode on the camera. Moving around to the back side of the camera, we have a very large screen, 1.2 million dots, a little bit larger than on previous cameras at 3.2 inches. Talk about playback for a moment. So play back an image if you want. If you want to delete the image, you'll hit the garbage can once to indicate you want to throw it into the garbage, and then you'll hit it once again to actually delete it from the camera. You have a protect button, which is the little lock key, and what this does is it does not allow you to throw your images into the garbage. Now you can still reformat your card and get rid of your images that way, so do be careful. It's not permanently, truly locking those images in forever. If you want to check sharpness, zoom in and zoom out. Zooming in almost all the way. You don't want to go in all the way, and check to see how sharp your pictures are is a great way to ensure out in the field that you got the picture as sharp as you want it. When you zoom out, you can zoom out to thumbnails, including I think a 4 image, 9 image, and you can even go all the way back to a calendar if you want. So if you go on vacation, you can quickly jump from day to day rather than scrolling through every image on your camera. Now to scroll through your images, what you'll use is the multi-selector on the back of the camera. Left and right, previous image, next image. And if you go up and down, you can pull up more information or less information. And if you try that right now and nothing happens, it's because you're going to need to stick around till we go back into the menu, into something called Playback Display Options, and we check off a bunch of the options. So some of the optional screens besides the picture you actually took will be something that shows you the highlights, the RGB histogram, which is kind of a graph that shows you how good of exposure you got, and then the rest of the shooting data that you've worked with. The I button down on the bottom is a shortcut into what's called the retouch menu. You might call this Photoshop on board the camera. And so it's not something I'm real big into, but you can go in and you could do red eye correction, you could trim an image, crop it up a little bit, you could make a color image black and white, and you could change around some of the filter effects. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a copy of the original image in a JPEG version for you to play with. So you're not going to harm any images, it's just that you have very limited resources in what you do to your image. All right, what else do we have on the back of the camera? So we have our white balance and help button. This is a triple duty button. We already talked about the key, which locks your images in the playback mode. The question mark basically means help. What's going on? When you're in the menu system and you're under a line that you're like, what does this do? You can hit the question button and it brings up a little bit of description about what that item is. The main reason people are pressing this button is to get to the WB, the white balance effect. And so let's bring in some of the white balance options in here. And so this camera records light, but it doesn't know what type of light you're working under. Is it fluorescent? Is it tungsten lights? And so this way you can tell exactly with the camera what's going on. Because if you don't, the camera doesn't necessarily know what color snow is, and it could end up tweaking the color of the snow if it's not really sure. And so let's bring in the Kelvin scale here, which is how we measure light. And so sunlight is a little over 5,000 degrees Kelvin, and we have a number of different options for kind of normal, natural light situations. And then for artificial light, incandescent light, the type of light that a lot of people have in their homes is very orange in color. You would need to adjust your white balance to match the type of lights that you are working under if you want correct light. Now, beyond these, you have another set of options. You have preset manual, where you would photograph a white sheet of paper, for instance, and you would tell the camera to correct for that white piece of paper. And this camera has a new feature which is kind of fun. I haven't seen it on a camera before. It's a spot white balance that you can activate from live view or movie view. Basically, you just take the camera, you point it at something white, and you press a button, and it calibrates the color to that white object, which is very nice. If you know the Kelvin temperature, anyone know the Kelvin temperature in here right now? Quickly guess. Well, it feels like it's about 68, 69. Wait, Kelvin, actually with these lights in here, it's pretty close to natural daylight in here. It's probably around 6,000 degrees in here right now. But if you knew the number, let's say you worked at the Creative Live Studio. I don't know, are they hiring right now? They've been hiring a lot lately. And let's say it's your job to come in here and shoot pictures, and your only job is to shoot pictures in this room. Once you figure out what temperature these lights are in here, you could set your camera to, let's just say it's 6,000 K. Leave it at 6000K, and every time you shoot pictures in here, it's going to be perfect, so long as the lights don't change. And so, very convenient in that type of scenario. And then finally, there's something called auto white balance. And auto white balance is where the camera figures things out for you and takes a wild guess at what's going on. And as much as I am a manual guy, I kind of like auto white balance. And I got two reasons for it. Number one, it does a pretty good job and gets me pretty close to the mark. Number two is I like to shoot in RAW. And if you shoot RAW, white balance doesn't really matter too much because you can always go back and fix it without any harm to the original image. So no damage to the original image. Having said that, if I am in a particular situation where I know the lighting is not going to change and it's something very obvious, I'm out on a bright sunny day and I'm shooting, I'm going to set it to sunlight because that's going to be the most color correct and it's not going to change from shot to shot. And so my general recommendation is to set it to auto white balance. And then if you see a problem or you're working in an area where you're going to have similar lighting for a large number of pictures, then flip it over to the appropriate white balance setting. But utilize whatever ones in here you think are appropriate to your type of work. But a lot of good options in there. Okay, next button down is our zoom in button, which we've already talked about, but it's the quality button. This is very important for setting the image quality because I think this is highly unusual. The camera, out of the box, does not come set to the highest image quality. And so if you have just opened your camera, you just got a delivery from FedEx and UPS, and you're just playing with your camera right now, it's not set to the highest setting on here. And so the two basic options we have on the back of the camera are JPEG pictures or RAW pictures. And the RAW pictures are known in the Nikon nomenclature as NEF, stands for Nikon Electronic Format. And the highest quality images that you're going to get out of this camera are going to come from the NEFs, the NEFs or the RAW image. And so if you want the highest quality image, you want to set it to RAW. Now the downside to RAW is that you're going to have the right software to work with. The camera comes with software. All the other common programs out there like Photoshop and Lightroom and Aperture can all handle the RAW images from this camera. And so anyone who's pretty serious about what they're doing is going to be shooting RAW images with this camera. Now, if you don't really have your software game in place right now and you just want to start with JPEGs, the camera comes set to large, normal JPEGs. And I would recommend upping the quality to the best quality, which is large, fine quality JPEGs. And so what it's doing is it's compressing the information and it's reducing the file size with the norm. When you go to fine, you're going to get less images, and I'm sorry to say you're going to get a few less images on the memory card, but that's not a big deal. Memory cards are pretty cheap these days. It's well worth it, I think, to either shoot large fine or RAW. Now you do also have the additional option of setting RAW and a JPEG image. I don't recommend this for most people most of the time. What happens then is you take one picture, you're going to get two photographs, a RAW and a JPEG. And that would be a special case scenario. For instance, you're shooting your friend's wedding and they want really high quality images, so you shoot RAW. But they said, you know what, could you do a slideshow at the reception? And you're wondering, how are you going to download and process 500 images from the ceremony into a slideshow at the reception in 20 minutes? And that isn't going to happen. And that's why you shoot JPEG images so that you can quickly download those to the computer and you can make a slideshow with those. You eventually throw those away, or those are just used for the slideshow, and the RAW images are kept for the high quality prints. And so it's a special case scenario. You normally don't want to go around shooting two files. It's just going to clutter up your hard drive. And so that is controlled by pressing the quality button and turning the main command dial. If you shoot JPEGs, and we all do shoot JPEGs from time to time, if you press the quality button and turn the front dial, you'll change the size of the JPEG, which is just simply the number of pixels that it's recording. And so obviously if you want the best quality, you want it large. You didn't spend all this money on a 24 megapixel camera to get 6 megapixels out of it, most likely. If you don't have a computer and you can't scale it down with anything else, or if you really don't need that large a file, you could choose a smaller image size, but most people want to have it on the largest, best quality image.
Daily Shooter asks, if you're using live view, can you see the changes in white balance? So I know that's going back a few slides to white balance, but...
Well, we haven't done that, but let's do it in here right now. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera around, so hopefully our camera over here can see it. And we haven't officially introduced live view, but we'll jump around just because we feel like doing it. So I'm going to throw it into live view, and we have kind of a whiteboard over here. I don't know how, it looks pretty white. And I'm going to hold down the white balance button and see if I can get this to work. Oh, please do this. Come on. And let's see, I need to, where am I going? There we go. And so I believe that we can see it happening. Let me change it to something else with a different color. And so, data acquired. So yes, you can see it directly in camera.
All right, there you go. Dave is a gentleman or woman, not sure who you are, but they asked the question earlier about the ISO, and they said, to add to the previous question, I believe my D300s also can go as low as ISO 100, but its native lowest is 200. Would going to ISO 100 by the extended range of low 1 lessen the quality, just like going up in ISO?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
And I can correct a mistake that I had earlier in the class where I said the camera doesn't go below 100. This camera at this point in time right now doesn't go below 100. You can get it down lower than that, but you have to go in and release some locks on the camera. The native ISO on this camera is 100, which is the sensitivity that the sensor is acquiring the best data. It's where you're going to get the best information off of the pixels. Anything other than that, the quality goes down. And what happens typically when you go down with low 1, and I haven't technically tested this, but this is true of other cameras, is you don't encounter noise as you compress the tonal range. And so that's likely what's going to happen is you're just compressing the tonal range. And so you have a smaller range of colors in the image. In some cases, it's not a big deal and it's perfectly acceptable, but it's not, in general, better quality.
We had a few questions about banding. Mango7 asks, they're from Washington, D.C., and they ask, I'm going to jump the gun and ask John if he knows about the banding problem in D7100 and if he can address it, please. Thanks. And then in parentheses, I own a G7100 and I see the problem and am terribly disappointed and worried. Have you noticed that?
I have not seen that problem.
Okay.
I have not noticed it as a rampant problem. It would seem to be maybe a fairly small problem. My guess is that they might be encountering something at very high ISOs. If it happens on anything other than high 1 and high 2, you may want to have your camera sent back to Nikon to have it checked out, because that's just not, it's not normal.
Okay.
When you get to extremes on the ISO, that can happen from camera to camera. And wouldn't be too surprising, but if it's happening at ISO 800, I would send it back to Nikon.
Okay. We had a few people asking about what lenses you would recommend for this camera.
Oh, you know, I've got a great slide for that. Actually, I got a few slides for that. There's a lot of good lenses. I will say that the kit lens, the 18-105 that it comes with, it's not a bad lens. It's nothing to get overly excited about. It's a good starter lens. Unless you know exactly what you're doing, it's a good way to kind of get your feet going until you figure out exactly what you want. But I'll have some specific recommendations later on.